Jean Lee is the new director of the Wilson Center's Hyundai Motor Korea Foundation Center for Korean History and Public Policy. She joins us to talk about what else, the latest on the Korean Peninsula. Jean, welcome not only to Wilson Center now, but welcome to the office. Great to have you here in your new role.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Let me ask you, in the last couple of days, we saw these revelations that there have been secret meetings going on between the U.S. and North Korea, planning a potential summit between the two presidents. How much do we know about that?
Well, it's good news, first of all, because there had been some concern that they weren't in touch. But so it's certainly good news that we're getting reports that they are in contact and are discussing the logistics for this anticipated summit between President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. We did have some news reports based on discussions with U.S. officials. It sounds like they're still working out the exact location, so that remains to be revealed, and the exact date. What we know about the date is that President Trump had said earlier that he would do it before the end of May, but recently he said it'll be sometime in the end of May and perhaps into early June. So that date is a little bit more fluid than we thought.
Has South Korea been involved in these secret meetings?
Not that we know about, but South Korea is certainly trying to play a role in facilitating the communication between the United States and North Korea. So perhaps they do have some role that we haven't confirmed, or we haven't heard any confirmation about that.
Any speculation on a location? I think, was it Sweden that volunteered its services if they were looking for a place to meet?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about where it would be, and I think that it would make sense if it was someplace that is neutral and amenable to both leaders. They have their own propaganda purposes for where they want to hold this very
symbolism
landmark,
looming large.
Exactly, and also safety and security issues. So they want to maximize the drama of this event, and so I think that remains to be seen where it's going to be held.
The tonal change in this story from calculations of potential casualties if a nuclear exchange occurred on the Korean Peninsula to now North Korea saying it's willing to discuss denuclearization. Talk to us about that evolution and whether we could see that coming or should have seen that coming.
Yeah, it may seem like a very abrupt change, and in some ways it feels a little bit like whiplash. We went from this heightened rhetoric, and from Little Rocket Man, the moniker,
name calling,
exactly, name calling, to let's sit down together and have a summit. But I think in some ways, so if you look at this from the Pyongyang perspective, and I try to look at it from that perspective because that's the side that we're missing, it follows to them a very rational path. So just to lay out, just to back up a bit, we did see more than a year of heightened tensions. And I say heightened because it's been tense for years.
Right.
North Korea has been building and testing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles in violation of UN security resolutions for years. But for the past year, that pace has accelerated. And I do think that one thing that the leader of North Korea has done is taken advantage of the rhetoric from the White House to justify launching those tests. And he's able to go to his people and say, look, we are under threat, so I've got to build up this defense system. He accelerated that pace so that he got that program to a point where it was a verifiable threat to global security. He did prove that he could fire a long-range ballistic missile possibly capable of striking the mainland U.S., which was one of his goals. Now, he did fire that at a trajectory where it didn't actually land on U.S. soil, and also tested a small enough hydrogen nuclear bomb underground that had such powerful capacity. So he had those two technologies, accomplished that last year, and at the end of last year said, okay, I'm satisfied. I think we've proven that we've got this verifiable defense system. And I read that as an opening. And so once he said, okay, I feel like we're now a nuclear power, now I am ready to reach out and talk to the United States as a peer. So understanding what their objective was, it made absolute sense to me that the next step, and one of the things that
But a lot of people miss that.
perhaps. And one of the things I said back then was, now is the time. If you understand North Korea, then you'll also understand that now is the time to reach out. There's an opening here. He is telling the world, I can take a pause in testing. Exactly.
It almost sounds Trumpian, if I can use that term, as far as come on strong up front and then be willing to maybe backpedal a little bit in your dealings, but set the agenda with harsh rhetoric, with the actual tests, and now set up the circumstances under which you're willing to negotiate.
What is so fascinating is that these two leaders, in some respects, are very similar in the game that they
Neither
play.
likes to hear that.
Well, we'll see, because they I think in some ways they may understand one another in certain ways. They both understand the effect of rhetoric. They also understand that it is rhetoric and that you can back down from that, and that it's part of a negotiation or it's part of a game. And so some people may say, after you've gone from this game of name calling, how can you reach out? But we've seen Donald Trump do that repeatedly. We're seeing him doing that right now with the leader of China, going back and forth in terms of being tough, but also reaching out. We're seeing him doing that now with North Korea as well. I think one thing that would certainly appeal to the North Koreans, and this is something that I've seen throughout Donald Trump's presidency and also during the campaign for his presidency, is that he's unpredictable. And that unpredictability, I think, really appeals to the North Koreans. They see some opportunity there. With the unpredictability, there's room for negotiation. And so I think they earmarked that early on, took advantage of it, and also are jumping into the opportunity that presents right now.
We talked about South Korea desiring a role in these negotiations. Will China want to be part of this? Will Japan? Are there others who will want to be at the table or at least involved?
None of the players in this region wants to be left out of this discussion. This is a larger regional issue. It's not just about the United States and North Korea. Those are the two key players because, of course, for North Korea, the United States is the country that they want to engage with. The United States is the country that they consider their arch enemy, and they do consider them still at war with the United States because the Korean War of the 1950s was never settled. But it certainly makes every other player in this region nervous. So South Korea, it's interesting. They were very concerned about the fact that they might be bypassed because, let me just lay it out very clearly, but they called it Korea passing, and this is a little bit of what we call a Konglish phrase. It's a little bit of it doesn't make sense in English. But what that means is there are concerns among the South Koreans that they may be bypassed. And the reason that's such a worry is that it is the Korean people, the South Korean people, who are directly in harm's way. And the concern is if the North Koreans and the Americans come to some sort of agreement, say freezing just long-range ballistic missiles, that South Korean interests may not be addressed. They may, for example, decide to freeze development of long-range missiles, but not the short-range ones that are that are a real threat to the immediate region. And for the same reason, Japan does not want to be sidelined. And so Japan is picking up this phrase and calling it Japan passing, concerns that they might be left out of this equation as well. And China certainly has a history of trying to play a mediating role, but does not want its interests left out as well. So you're going to see all of these players in the region trying to make sure that they have some say in any discussions about denuclearization with North Korea.
Do you think it's safe to assume that this meeting will happen now, or should we still be talking about it as a likely meeting or a possible meeting?
Well, as a journalist, I never report on something until it happens.
Sure.
And I think that there's still a long way to go. As I said, they're still deciding on the location, the agenda, but we are starting to see some positive
But it is April,
signs.
And they're talking about May or June.
Yes, and so I do think that both of these leaders have now said that they want this to happen, and so there's certainly will and will on both sides to make this happen. There are a lot of other issues that need to be sorted out, but I would call it a highly anticipated meeting between these two leaders.
Final thought, Jean, is about setting the expectations level. how would you recommend that people approach this as far as what's possible?
You know, I think I always characterize the South Korean perspective on all of this as hopeful but skeptical, and I think that's how we have to look at it. We can't help but hope for some sort of agreement that would put an end to this extremely destabilizing nuclear program, and yet we have to remember that we've been down this path before, that the United States has negotiated with North Korea in the past, and that those agreements have been broken, frankly, on both sides. And so it's a very, very tricky process. There's certainly different things at stake here. The North Koreans have a certain agenda. They have a certain list of priorities. The Americans have a certain agenda and a list of priorities, and whether they can get on the same page. They may get to the same table, but can they get on the same page when it comes to denuclearization? It is not as easy as it sounds.
Well, stay tuned. And it's great to have you in-house now so that we can revisit this topic more frequently.
We will be talking about this all year, I suspect.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.